Okay, for this module, we're really going to want to have our calculators with us because there's quite a bit of math. That's not to say that we're going to use calculators traditionally in this class, but to really kind of get the concept, we need to bring our calculators. So go ahead and pause the video now. Make sure you have access to a calculator, something that you can use to work out the problems that we're going to work through in just a minute. So here we go. We're going to, we finished Module 10, we're going straight into Module 11, and we're going to be talking about two different types of GDP. One is nominal GDP. We'll introduce nominal first, and then we'll get into real GDP, and we'll discuss how they're different, which one is perhaps more accurate, okay, if we're talking about present day, and then we'll go from there. So let's get into it. So when we talk about one thing GDP tells us, okay, when we hear a report of the latest GDP, we hear about current production, right? We hear about current production at current prices. Of course, what's the problem? You know, prices change, right? So that can lead to some discrepancies, which we'll address in a second. For sake of example, if GDP in the United States is twice as big as a country, or let's say better example, if GDP in India is twice as big as, I don't know, Canada, for example, can we say that the standard of living in India is twice better than the standard of living in Canada? And there are reasons, obviously, you know, if we don't live under a rock, we know that that's not the case. We know that Canada has a higher standard of living. But why is that? They have a higher India has a higher GDP. Shouldn't that mean that they have double the standard of living? So let's get into that a little bit. What we're looking at is a depiction of nominal GDP. This is U.S. nominal GDP, and you may not be able to see these numbers down here, but this is 1980, and then it goes through 1985. And then year 2000, year by year, all the way to 2005. And so what do you see? You see, is it going up or down? Clearly, every single year is what we see is that GDP is increasing at a pretty steady rate. I would suggest to you that this does not tell the whole picture, that we don't really get a good idea by looking at nominal GDP of what in the world is going on here. So, or what's going on at least in those given years. So let's talk about how we account for, or how we adjust to account for changing prices. So prices are changing. Obviously, things cost differently than they did in 1980, 1981, than they do today, or even in 2000, 2005. There's significant differences, right, in the price levels, and we know that over time, price levels increase, right? You can't buy, you know, whereas in my grandfather's day, you may have been able to buy an ice cream cone for 5 cents. If you go to Dairy Queen, you know, you're going to pay, you know, several dollars for the same quality ice cream cone. But that doesn't mean it's worth any more or worth any less. It has to do with the change of prices over time. So let's talk about how we account for these changes in prices, and the answer is real GDP, not nominal GDP in this case, real GDP. So what does real GDP tell us that nominal GDP does not? One of the things that real GDP tells us is that it calculates the value of current production using prices from a fixed point in time. So let's think about that. If it calculates the value of given prices in a fixed point in time, then if we are using the amount of goods that people are purchasing today and use prices from 1981, then we might have a better reference point to gauge standard of living between today and 1981, because we have leveled the playing field in terms of price. If we don't level that playing field, it seems that we are light years ahead of where we were in 1981, when even though technology has improved and living conditions have improved since that year, it's not apples and oranges. It's not completely two different ballparks, as nominal GDP might suggest. So it's using a fixed. It calculates the value of current production using prices at a fixed point in time, and then that fixed point would be that base year. The fixed point would be the base year. Okay. So and I'll show you what I mean by that. But we're going to use one base year to calculate real GDP. And it allows for GDP comparison between years, as nominal GDP would not do nearly as well. So, if we look at the graph for real GDP, what you should notice is that, actually there's a different story here than what nominal GDP suggested. So, real GDP from 80 to 85, we actually see a downturn, don't we? Okay, we see a downturn. And that wasn't the case in the other graph. In the early 80s, there was a recession, okay? There was a recession. And because of that, we see an economic downturn. But the following years after that, we see rapid growth. And from 2000 to 2005, we still see growth. This is going to be, excuse me, a little bit flatter than that other graph. Okay, this is important. This is where we're going to have to bust out our calculators. So what I'd like you to do is I'd like you, based off of what we talked about last time as far as calculating GDP, what we talked about in Module 10, remember how to calculate GDP. We're price times quantity, right? And then added with the other price times quantity. So we're multiplying these, we're multiplying these and multiplying these, and then we're adding them together to get what nominal GDP is going to be in the year 2007. So take a minute to do that. I want to encourage you not to go forward in the PowerPoint until you figure it out, and just to make sure that you do it right, okay? So I'll give you a second, pause it, and continue. Okay, I'm assuming you've paused it, so we can continue. You can do the same thing with the bottom row here, and we'll figure out what we get in terms of nominal GDP. And I'll even show you the work, okay, the work that kind of goes along with it. So in 2007, what we see is 100 times 100, as we said, so price times quantity. And then quantity times price, add those together, you should have 14,000. And then on the bottom row in 2008, we're doing the same exact thing, and we're coming up with 20,100. Okay, so do we see an increase? The answer is yes. 14,000 to 20,000 would be a significant increase. Okay, so that's the story with the nominal GDP. What is real GDP in the base year? Okay, so let's figure out how to figure out real GDP. So in this, we will use 2007 as the base year. We will use 2007 as the base year. That means when we're figuring it out for both 2007 and 2008, we are going to use that those 2007 prices with the current year quantities. Well, what do we come up with for nominal GDP? Well, if we're using 2007 as the base year and we're using given year quantities, that means that both 2007 is both the given year and the base year. That means that 100 times 100 and 80 times 50, add those together, what do you get? You get 14,000, right? It's the same exact thing, and it's because we use 2007 as the base year. Okay, so take a minute to let that kind of sink in. Anytime, always, for whatever base year you use, real GDP will be exactly the same as nominal GDP. But let's see if it changes. Let's see if it changes when we do 2008. Okay, so looking at 2008, we've got tons of corn. We've got a bit of an increase in quantity, right? But also an increase in price. And then here, the quantity is the same, but we see a massive increase in price. So it would stand to reason that we'd end up with that 20,000. But let's see what happens if we use 2008 quantities with 2007 prices. So if you haven't done so already, take a minute to try to figure out real GDP, okay, for 2008. Okay, we can continue. And what we end up doing is we will multiply the 2008 quantities, 2007 prices. For corn, and then for soybeans, quantities for 2008, 2007 prices. Let's see how it works out. What do we end up with? Well, so we do that multiplication. We add those figures together. We should come up with 15,000. Now, did we still see an increase? The answer is yes. 14,000 is less than 15,000. We saw an increase even with real GDP between those 2 years. But was it as pronounced as nominal GDP suggested? The answer is no. That was not the case. Okay, so we got to move on. One additional point is that GDP does not equal happiness, meaning that no matter how happy you are, no matter how much money you have, it doesn't necessarily mean that your country, and there's all sorts of ways to measure happiness. But there is a correlation. In fact, there is shown that there are less happy countries in the world that are third world. But there are also poor countries that are more happy than even the United States or some countries in Europe. So there are other factors that go into that, but don't equate GDP with happiness. That's a false comparison. Okay, so let's go through another example, and I'm going to add an additional item to kind of take in consideration. But we're doing these three things: widgets, gizmos, and thingamagigs. And we are essentially doing the same thing. So this time the 2 years are 2006 and 2007. Okay, 2006 and 2007. Let's first calculate for nominal GDP. So I'll give you a second. Calculate nominal GDP for 2006. Calculate nominal GDP for 2007, and then we'll see what your numbers are. Take a second and do that. Okay, we're going to move forward. So what are those numbers going to be? Well, for 2006, this is what we have. The answer is $200. Okay, so $200. We did what we did before and added those up. Got the GDP. Nominal GDP is $200. What about 2007? Well, 2007, you're going to have $240. Was there an increase? Yes, there was an increase in nominal GDP again here. But again, as we can anticipate, perhaps the prices, perhaps the inflated prices between 2006 and 2007 threw us off a little bit. So let's try to calculate for that. Okay? Let's see. Compute the percentage change in nominal GDP from 2006 to 2007. So this is what we have. If we're to compute those changes, we have to compute percentage change. You take year 2 minus year 1 over year 1. Let's see what that ends up looking like. Year 2 over year 1 minus year 1. So if we do that, we get 240 minus 200. That will equal 40. 40 over 200 is going to, fraction will be 1/5, and 1/5 converted to a percent is 20%. Okay, so again, year 2 minus year 1 over year 1, and then you could, and then calculate or change that decimal or change that fraction to a percent. Okay, that's how we're going to work through that problem. All right, moving forward, let's do real GDP. Let's do real GDP for the same problem we were just working on. So if we're doing real GDP for this problem, go ahead, take a second, work that out, pause the video, and we will continue from there. Okay, you should have paused the video, and let's see if you were right with that. All right, so if you calculate that out, I have the work there for you. If you didn't get it right, check yourself. 225 is what we've got for 2007. What would we have for 2000? Why didn't I put 2006 up there? Why wouldn't I have done that? Oh, because it's the same as what we came up with before 200. Remember, base year. Base year is always going to be the same as the given year, okay? Compute the percentage change in real GDP from 2006 to 2007. Again, I'll pause that for a second. Do the work. It's going to be the same way we did the nominal GDP with the percentage change just a second ago. So plug in those numbers, see what you get. Remember, year 1 minus year 2, year 2 minus year 1 over year 1. And then calculate the fraction to a percent. Let's see what you get. Should be 12.5%. If you didn't get that, make sure you talk to me about that in class when I get back, whenever that is, and we can go from there. And that, guys, is the end of Module 11. Okay, we will discuss calculating unemployment and the meaning of unemployment next time.